China enacts wartime measures to fight the coronavirus. Again, the International Criminal Court refuses to investigate China, and a Hong Kong newspaper publisher is seen in chains. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China News Headlines. The Chinese Communist Party had enacted so-called wartime measures to fight the coronavirus. That was back in June. And it worked. By the end of summer, China had beat the coronavirus. At least based on data provided by the Chinese Communist Party. Except there's one small problem, which is that it doesn't explain the severe measures Chinese officials are taking right now to combat the coronavirus, the one it totally beat several months ago. According to this article in state-run Heilongjiang Daily, Heilongjiang Province's deputy governor ordered 2 cities to go into wartime mode to stop the coronavirus. One of these northeastern cities, Dongning, is banning some transportation services and road travel, and residents were ordered to take nucleic acid tests for the disease. And according to this statement from the CDC in another city, Suifenhe, all of its roughly 70,000 residents must be tested for the virus within 3 days. Those are both things you would definitely do if you're confident you already beat the coronavirus. Even Sichuan province has entered wartime mode this week. But don't worry, because China now reports few to none domestically transmitted COVID-19 cases. Only 12 cases were reported on December 15th. Weird how the Chinese Communist Party's behavior here doesn't match up with what it says. But does this mean China might be facing another wave of the coronavirus? Possibly. It's hard to tell since the Chinese Communist Party has most likely been lying about their coronavirus numbers the whole time, just like it did in the very beginning. But when it gets too big to keep covering up entirely, they say it's just a small issue in isolated places, and then they lock those places down. This reminds me of the episode I made at the beginning of the outbreak. The coronavirus cure isn't authoritarianism. You should watch it. It's still pretty relevant today. Over the summer, China faced unprecedented flooding. The flooding devastated farmland, and a lot of people were worried about the impact on China's food supply. And it looks like the floods did have an impact. In the first 11 months of the year, China imported almost 100 million tons of grain, up nearly 30%. This is a big deal. The Chinese Communist Party is more dependent on imports than ever. So while the regime can threaten a trade war, as it has against Australia, it can't really do that to everyone. This gives the international community a lot of power over the regime, not the other way around, as the business community and Wall Street seem to think. Speaking of the business community selling out to China, a Chinese national working for Bloomberg News has been detained. Hayes Fan was brought in on suspicion of endangering national security. Chinese journalists who work for foreign media in China take a big risk. They're not legally allowed to be employed as reporters, only as news assistants. And as Chinese citizens, they're more vulnerable to harassment and arrest by Chinese authorities. Complicating the issue is the fact that Bloomberg, the business, is incredibly dependent on access to the China market for data that it feeds into its terminals and as a place to sell the terminals themselves. And that has led to allegations for a long time that Bloomberg News censors its reporting on China to protect Bloomberg's business, like this article in 2013. So this latest situation could get awkward for Bloomberg. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is demanding that 9 social media and tech companies, including Amazon, TikTok, and Facebook, explain how they harness users' data and what they do with it. And considering TikTok has been accused of sending user data to China, it will be very interesting to see what comes out of this. And coming up after the break, the U.S. government has done something unprecedented by sanctioning a certain Chinese official. Welcome back. The Falun Gong spiritual practice has been the victim of severe persecution in China since the 1999 crackdown. Practitioners in China face arrest, torture, rape, and murder. And that's not even the worst of it. According to the China Tribunal, forced organ harvesting has been committed for years throughout China on a significant scale, and that Falun Gong practitioners have been one, and probably the main, source of organ supply. The tribunal also concluded that the Uyghurs, the mostly Muslim ethnic minority that the Communist Party is putting in concentration camps, could become an organ bank as well. Well, finally some good news. The U.S. government is actually doing something about forced organ harvesting. 3 U.S. lawmakers have introduced a bipartisan bill called the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act. This is a big deal. If it becomes law, it will have real teeth. Among other things, it sanctions foreign officials and entities who engage in or support forced organ harvesting. It authorizes the U.S. government to deny or revoke passports from Americans who illegally go to China to purchase organs. And it would require a report on U.S. institutions that train Chinese transplant doctors involved in forced organ harvesting. Technically, the bill itself doesn't mention China or Falun Gong or the Uyghurs. But from the way the U.S. lawmakers who introduced the bill talk about it, it's pretty clear what it's for. Meanwhile, another part of the U.S. government, the State Department, has, for the first time ever, sanctioned a Chinese official for persecuting Falun Gong. The State Department sanctioned Huang Yuanxiong, chief of the Public Security Bureau in the Chinese city of Xiamen, for severe violations of religious freedom of Falun Gong practitioners. The sanctions were enacted on December 10th, International Human Rights Day. They apply to the official and his wife. In total, the U.S. State Department sanctioned 17 officials of foreign governments and their families for gross human rights violations. I'm not sure if Secretary Pompeo is using gross in the sense of disgusting or huge, or both. This follows a meeting last year between Trump and representatives of persecuted religious groups in China, including Falun Gong, Uyghurs, Tibetan Buddhists, and House Christians. But it wasn't just the U.S. State Department defending Falun Gong. More than 900 lawmakers in 35 countries signed a joint statement on International Human Rights Day condemning the persecution of Falun Gong. Meanwhile, the retired Secretary General of Amnesty International in Canada issued a statement in support of Falun Gong, saying it has also been so truly despairing to witness this unrelenting and cruel human rights repression, and at the same time, the half-hearted at best and certainly woefully inadequate response from the international community. He was part of a panel of lawmakers, lawyers, and human rights advocates meeting to discuss Canada-China policy. One of the speakers was Irwin Cotler, the Canadian co-chair of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. He said the Canadian government specifically ignored the persecution of Falun Gong, afraid it might disrupt ties with China. He said, "I recall being advised by government officials that we should not hold these press conferences because the government was about to embark on a trade mission to China. My answer, reported in the press at the time, was that there is no contradiction between promotion of trade and promotion of human rights. The contradiction is between the promotion of trade and the lack of promotion and protection of human rights." Wait, but what if the trade is worth a lot of money? The International Criminal Court says it won't investigate China's detention of Uyghur Muslims. Why? Well, the court says the alleged crimes appear to have been committed solely by nationals of China within the territory of China. And because China is not a member state of the International Criminal Court, the court has no jurisdiction. The case was originally brought to the International Criminal Court because some Uyghurs were abducted from Cambodia and Tajikistan and deported to China. Cambodia and Tajikistan are ICC member states. But the court said that since most of the crimes happened inside China, that doesn't count. I mean, allegedly more than 1 million Uyghur Muslims are in concentration camps in Xinjiang. And allegedly they've been forced to do slave labor. And allegedly they, like Falun Gong, have become a source of forced organ harvesting. But I mean, that's in China, not our problem. Speaking of not our problem, just a friendly reminder, Apple, Coca-Cola, and Nike are just a few of the American companies lobbying against a U.S. bill targeting forced labor in China. When Nike said, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, I assumed they meant believe in profits, even if it means sacrificing Uyghurs. Human sacrifice. Welcome to Warhammer 2020. And now, on to Hong Kong, where the coronavirus doesn't stop officials from going about their normal business of arresting political dissidents. Jimmy Lai, the owner of the pro-democracy Apple Daily, was seen in chains. Lai is 72 years old, so I don't think they're really concerned that he's somehow going to pull a Bruce Willis and overpower the guards. I think the point was to humiliate him. But really, it just makes him look badass. I mean, you're not a legit political dissident until they put you in chains. He's been charged under China's draconian national security law for colluding with foreign forces and endangering national security. His bail has been denied a second time. In an interview, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, Jimmy Lai is a true patriot. He cares deeply about the people of Hong Kong, as does our administration. Lai was simply trying to speak about the basic rights for the people of Hong Kong. The UK's Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, also condemned Lai's imprisonment. He said, the Hong Kong national security law breaches the internationally binding joint declaration and is now being used to charge Jimmy Lai. This highlights the authorities' continued attacks on the rights and freedoms of its people. China has also charged 10 Hong Kongers who attempted to flee the city to Taiwan in a raft. These activists are being held in prison in mainland China, not Hong Kong. 8 of them were charged with illegally crossing a boundary, which can carry up to a year in a Chinese prison. The other 2 were charged with organizing it and face 7 years. According to the charges, they illegally crossed into Chinese waters from Hong Kong, which is weird because Hong Kong is a part of China, which means they crossed from China into China. A serious crime indeed. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Charlie W.B. Rook asks, will there be another crossover episode with 2 Chris's again? Or 2 Matts ever? Ah, you must be talking about me doing a collab with Chris Chappell from the popular YouTube show America Uncovered. I'm sure that can be arranged, but 2 Matts?
That's crazy. Absolutely crazy.